The morning Earl Bickford stole my boat, I was standing across County Road 12 in the gravel lot of a closed bait shop, drinking burnt coffee from a green thermos, and watching him make the worst decision of his life. He thought the chain on my gate had been left loose because a woman living alone at the edge of Pineglass Lake had finally gotten careless. What he did not know was that I had spent 23 years in the Coast Guard learning one hard truth. Most people tell you exactly who they are when they believe nobody is watching. My name is Marlene Voss. I was 52 years old in the summer of 1995, and after more than 2 decades fixing engines, pulling stranded boaters out of bad weather, and listening to men explain equipment I had personally repaired 3 times, all I wanted was a quiet little place where nobody expected anything from me. That was why I moved to the cabin on the north end of Pineglass Lake, a weathered cedar place my Uncle Cal had left me when he passed. It was not fancy, not even close. The kitchen floor leaned toward the stove. The porch steps groaned like an old man getting out of bed, and every time the wind came down from the ridge, the chimney made a noise like somebody trying to whistle through a cracked tooth. But it had water, pine trees, a small boat shed, and a narrow old dock reaching into a cove that went still as glass every morning before 7. After my husband Tom died, I spent a long time pretending I was fine with being busy. I worked extra shifts, volunteered for jobs nobody wanted, drove too far for groceries just to stay in the car a little longer. Then one day, I realized I was 50 years old, eating canned soup over the sink and getting nervous whenever the house got too quiet. So when Uncle Cal's lawyer called and said the cabin was mine, I packed 2 duffel bags, my toolbox, a box of Tom's fishing lures I had not opened in 6 years, and I drove north until the highway got narrow and the radio started fading in and out between country stations. For 3 days, Pineglass Lake gave me exactly what I'd hoped for. I woke with the sun, made coffee in an old enamel pot, fixed loose boards on the dock, read a paperback in the afternoon, and sat on the porch at night listening to frogs argue in the reeds. Then Al Bickford came walking down my gravel drive in khaki shorts, white socks, brown loafers, and a navy windbreaker with the words Whispering Pines Lakeshore Association stitched over the pocket. He had a clipboard under one arm, and the kind of smile men wear when they have already decided they own whatever room they are standing in. I was replacing a rotten railing post when I heard his shoes crunching over the stones, slow and deliberate, like he wanted the sound to announce him before he had to. I kept working. I figured if I ignored him long enough, maybe he would mistake me for a woman who did not enjoy company. "Morning," he said. I looked over my shoulder and saw a thick man in his late 50s, with thinning silver hair combed carefully over a bald spot, a pink face, and eyes that smiled about half a second after his mouth did. "Depends who is asking," I said. He laughed like I had made a charming joke. "Earl Bickford, president of the Whispering Pines Lakeshore Association. I just wanted to come by, welcome you to the neighborhood, make sure you have everything you need." I wiped my hands on my jeans and looked past him at the empty road. "I have a hammer, a dock, and a coffee pot. Seems like I'm doing all right." He gave a little nod, but his eyes moved right past me to the lake, to my dock, to the boat shed, to the old aluminum fishing boat tied beside the pilings. "Your uncle was a good man," he said. "Very community-minded. He always understood that Pineglass Lake belongs to everybody who lives around it." I looked at him for a moment, then looked down at the board I was holding. "Funny," I said. "I thought property taxes were how we figured that sort of thing out." His smile tightened around the corners. Of course, but you know what I mean. Your uncle let folks come through here. Kids swam off this dock. Families held picnics. We had fireworks out on the cove most 4th of Julys. That sounds nice," I said. "You should keep doing that on your property." Earl tapped his clipboard with one finger. "This whole stretch has been treated as shared access for years." "Treated by who?" I asked. He looked at me. "By the community. And did the community buy it?" "Well, not exactly." "Did the community insure it?" No. "Did the community pay to replace the dock boards you were standing next to?" "No." "But then it sounds to me like my uncle was generous, and now people have started confusing generosity with ownership." That was the first time Earl Bickford looked at me without smiling. It did not last long, maybe 2 seconds, but I saw it. Under all the soft manners and neighborly language, there was a man who had not come to introduce himself. He had come to establish control. He recovered fast. "I am sure we can work something out," he said. "There is a community picnic next month and people were hoping to use the dock again. We have a few long-standing traditions around here." I set the hammer down. Mr. Bickford, I do not know what your traditions are, but I just moved in. This is private land. I am not part of your association. I am not interested in joining it, and nobody is using my dock unless I invite them. Earl looked past me at the lake again. A loon called somewhere out near the middle of the cove, one long, lonely sound that seemed to hang there between us. Then he said, "You know, Marlene, people around here do not take kindly to outsiders changing things." I stared at him. "Then it is a good thing I am not here to be liked." He left after that. But he did not walk away the way people usually do when they are finished talking. He walked away like a man making a note to himself. By lunch, I found a welcome packet tucked under a rock beside my mailbox. It was a thick folder with a cartoon pine tree on the front, a list of association rules, a calendar of meetings, a newsletter from Earl, and a brochure advertising something called the North Cove Experience. The brochure had pictures of children swimming, people grilling burgers, a couple holding hands under a sunset, and right there in the middle of it was my dock. Not a similar dock, not one down the road. Mine. I knew it because Uncle Cal had painted the handrail blue 20 years earlier, and the paint had peeled in the same crooked strip near the second post. At the bottom of the brochure it said, "Exclusive lakefront living with community access to the finest shoreline in Pine County." Under that, in smaller print, Bickford Homes. I stood at my kitchen counter for a long time, holding that brochure, feeling something old and cold start to move through me. It was not anger at first. Anger comes later. At first it was recognition. I had seen this kind of thing in the service. Somebody decides that rules are for other people. Somebody finds a weak spot, presses it gently, then waits to see whether anyone pushes back. If nobody does, the weak spot becomes a door. The next morning I drove into town, went to the county clerk's office and asked for every parcel map, easement record, shoreline survey and tax document connected to my property. The clerk was a woman named Ida Granger, who had known Uncle Cal since she was 16. She looked over the paperwork, adjusted her glasses and said, "Well, honey, if Earl Bickford told you he had a right to that dock, then Earl Bickford has been practicing fiction again." She showed me the map. My parcel ran all the way to the water. The cove was mine. The dock was mine. The narrow birch path Earl had called a community walkway sat entirely on my land. There was no easement, no shared access agreement, no association authority, nothing but an old habit built on the back of a kind man who had been too polite to say no. That afternoon I put up a small sign at the end of the drive. Private property. No trespassing. I did not make it dramatic. I did not write anything rude. I did not add exclamation marks. I figured the message was clear enough. 3 days later, someone had pulled the sign out of the ground and tossed it in the ditch. The post had been snapped at the base. I picked it up, brushed the dirt off, went back to town, bought a heavier post, and planted it in a bucket of concrete. Then I added a second sign near the lake path. Private dock. Permission required. 2 days after that, I found beer cans under my deck, cigarette butts in the flower bed, and a damp towel hanging over one of my railings. I did not need a committee to tell me what it meant. They were testing me. At first it was little things. A car slowing of the road, somebody taking pictures of my gate, a pair of teenagers cutting through the bushes toward the cove. One Saturday morning I found 3 women in matching polo shirts standing by my mailbox with a folding table, a coffee urn, and a cardboard sign that said Community Shoreline Cleanup Registration. I walked out carrying my rake and asked what exactly they thought they were doing. The tallest woman, a redhead named Linda Pollard, smiled at me in the same way Earl had smiled. "We are organizing volunteers for the lake cleanup," she said. "We will need access to the dock for kayaks and trash bags." "No, you will not," I said. "But the association voted." "I did not. Everyone benefits from a clean lake. Then everyone can clean the parts they own." A short woman beside her looked down at a clipboard. "Mr. Bickford said you might be difficult." I leaned on my rake. Did he put that in writing? The short woman looked startled. The redhead looked annoyed. Their coffee urn sat there steaming between us like it had wandered into the wrong argument. "We are only trying to help," Linda said. "That is what people say right before they move your furniture," I told her. "They left without their cleanup, but that evening I got a call on my answering machine. I pressed play and heard Earl's voice, warm and patient. "Marlene, this is Earl. I heard there may have been a misunderstanding with some volunteers today. I would hate for things to become unpleasant. Maybe you and I should sit down, clear the air, talk about what being a good neighbor really means." I listened to it twice. Then I rewound the tape and saved it. That became my routine. Every strange visit, every flyer, every late-night car rolling slowly past the gate, every phone message, I wrote it down in a spiral notebook Uncle Cal had left in a kitchen drawer. I wrote dates, times, descriptions, license plates when I could see them. I kept the flyers, I saved the answering machine tapes. I bought a cheap motion detector light at the hardware store in Graydon. Then another one. Then a small black and white video camera from Radio Shack that fed into a VCR hidden on a shelf inside the boat shed. It was not high-tech by today's standards, but in 1995 it felt like something out of a spy movie. The picture was grainy, the sound crackled, and the camera had a habit of picking up moths like they were enemy aircraft. But it worked. It showed a man in a baseball cap walking down my lake path at 11:43 on a Tuesday night. It showed somebody checking the latch on my boat shed. It showed Earl Bickford himself standing at the gate one Sunday afternoon, reading the sign for nearly a minute before looking directly toward the camera and walking away. I did not call the sheriff right away. Or maybe I should have. Some people would say I should have. But I knew Earl was trying to bait me. He wanted me to look unreasonable. He wanted to tell the neighborhood that the strange woman at the old Cal Voss cabin had gone paranoid, that I was overreacting, that I did not understand how things were done around Pine Glass Lake. I was not going to give him that story. Not yet. The first person in Whispering Pines who spoke honestly to me was June Alvarez. June lived 2 houses down from Earl, in a little yellow ranch house with aluminum siding and a porch full of potted geraniums. She was the association treasurer, though I did not know that at first. One rainy afternoon, she came up my drive carrying an umbrella with little pink roses printed on it and a pie wrapped in foil. I opened the door and she stood there looking nervous. "I brought apple," she said. "It is not a bribe, but it is probably not entirely unrelated." I let her in. She sat at my kitchen table, looked at the crooked floor, the kettle on the stove, the stack of maps I had been reading, and then she sighed. "Earl is not going to stop," she said. "I know. No, I mean, he is really not going to stop. He has been promising lake access to people buying those new Cedar Ridge homes. That is why he is so worked up. He told them the North Cove would stay open. Your dock looks better in the brochures than the public launch near the marina." I sat down across from her. So he sold people something that was never his. June looked down at her hands. That is the short version. She told me Earl had been president of the association for 9 years. He ran meetings like a mayor, a preacher, and the used car salesman all rolled into one. He liked rules when they helped him, and traditions when they made him look important. He had spent months pushing a small housing development near the lake, and his brother-in-law owned the construction company. The brochures had promised a quiet lake community with shared access to the North Shore, even though the land records had never backed it up. Uncle Cal had let folks wander through because he was lonely after his wife died, but Earl had turned Cal's kindness into a selling point. Why did nobody stop him? I asked. June gave a little tired laugh. Because people like Earl do not start by doing something big. They start by asking for a chair, then a key, then a favor, then a vote. By the time people notice what is happening, they are too embarrassed to admit they let it happen. I looked at the pie on the table. "And why are you telling me this?" June met my eyes. "Because my husband used to say that if you borrow a man's porch long enough, he starts thinking he owns the house. I should have listened to him sooner." That night I sat on the dock with a blanket around my shoulders and thought about Tom. He had been a quiet man, a mechanic like me, though he worked on trucks instead of boats. He hated arguments. Whenever something bothered him, he would say, "Do not make a war out of a bad fence." For years after he died, I had used that line as an excuse to avoid confrontation. I let people take up space in my life because I did not want to look difficult. I said yes when I meant no. I stayed quiet when I felt angry. I let grief turn me into somebody who apologized for existing. But sitting there on that dock, listening to the water slap against the pilings, I understood something Tom had never meant for me to misunderstand. A bad fence does not need a war. It needs fixing. The next morning I bought 2 steel gates, a spool of chain, 3 heavy locks, and a small brass bell. I set one gate at the road and one at the birch path near the cove. I poured concrete around the posts, tightened every bolt, checked every hinge twice, and hung the bell where anybody approaching the lake path would have to touch it. Under the bell I put a sign that said, "Ring bell. Wait for owner." I knew it was a little old-fashioned. That was the point. Nobody could later claim they did not know where the line was. The first time Earl saw the gates, he came with 3 board members and his daughter Kendra, who was getting married that September. They marched down my drive in a little group, dressed like they were coming to inspect a church basement. Earl wore a pale yellow polo shirt and carried his clipboard. Linda Pollard was there, along with a thin man named Roger Fields, who worked at the insurance office and had a face like he had been disappointed by every sandwich he had ever eaten. Kendra stood behind them in white shorts and sunglasses, her arms crossed tight over her chest. Earl rang the bell once. I opened the gate but did not unlock it. "Marlene," he said, "we need to talk." "You have been saying that for weeks," I told him. "It has not gotten more interesting." Earl's jaw moved once. "This is about Kendra's wedding." I looked at Kendra. She looked embarrassed, but not embarrassed enough to leave. "Congratulations," I said. "Where is it being held?" Earl spread one hand toward the lake. "The reception was going to be here, near the dock. It is a family tradition." "Your family has held weddings on my property?" I asked. "People have used this shoreline for special occasions for years." That was not my question. Kendra finally spoke. "My dad said it would be okay," she said. I looked at Earl. "There it is. That is the problem right there. You keep telling people things belong to you when they do not." Earl stepped closer to the gate. "Do you really want to be the woman who ruins a young bride's wedding over a dock?" I felt something hot rise in my chest, but I kept my voice level. "No, Earl. I want to be the woman who does not let a grown man use his daughter's wedding to steal her neighbor's property." For a second, nobody said anything. Even Roger looked uncomfortable. Kendra's face changed. She turned to her father. "You told me the association owned this," she said quietly. Earl did not look at her. "It is complicated." "No," I said. "It is not. It is mine." Earl took a breath, then looked at me with that calm, polite expression that had started to make my skin crawl. "You are making a mistake," he said. "People around here remember who makes life difficult." "Then they should remember your name first," I said. They left after that, but not before Earl leaned close enough to the gate that I could smell his aftershave. "You think a lock makes you safe?" he asked under his breath. I looked down at the chain between us. "No," I said. "I think it makes a message easier to read. By the end of the week, somebody cut the chain on the Lake Path gate. They did not get through because I had used a second lock behind the first, but the message was clear. I replaced the chain with heavier steel, took pictures of the cut links, and drove straight to the sheriff's office. Deputy Ray Ellis was there, a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s with a sunburned neck and a dry sense of humor that made him sound half asleep even when he was paying close attention. He had known Uncle Cal. He remembered fishing off that dock as a boy. I laid the chain, the photographs, the videotape, and the property map on his desk. He watched the footage of Earl at the gate, then the man in the baseball cap near the boat shed, then the 2 women at my mailbox. When he finished, he leaned back and rubbed his chin. "You got a suspect?" he asked. "I have a president of a homeowners association with a brochure problem." Ray smiled a little. "That is not usually how people phrase it. I am trying to stay charitable." He looked through the map. "Your land is yours, no question about it. But I need you to understand something. If I show up now, he will call it a neighbor dispute. He will say you are paranoid. He will say he was trying to preserve access. We need him to cross a clean line." I looked at the cut chain. "He already did." Ray nodded. "Maybe, but I need something that does not give him room to dance around it." I understood exactly what he meant. Earl lived in gray areas. He thrived there. He hid behind phrases like community harmony, public tradition, neighborly cooperation. But somebody who walked through a locked gate, entered a private boat shed and took a boat without permission was no longer standing in gray. That was the night I started thinking about Sparrow. Sparrow was my boat, though calling it a boat sometimes felt generous. She was a 16-foot aluminum runabout with a faded cream stripe along the side, a cracked windshield, and a stubborn old Johnson outboard that coughed like an old smoker when you first started it. I bought her from a retired deputy in Duluth 8 years earlier and spent every free weekend bringing her back to life. She was not pretty. She was not fast, but she floated straight, handled rough water better than she looked like she should, and had carried me through some hard days when I did not trust myself to sit still on land. During my Coast Guard years, I learned how to make simple systems work in bad conditions. You do not always need fancy equipment. Sometimes all you need is a throttle limiter, a backup kill switch, a tether line, and enough patience to test every part until you trust it. Sparrow had an old low-speed trolling setup I had built for quiet fishing in the cove. With the regular motor limited and the steering pinned to a controlled turn, she could travel in a wide, slow circle around the mooring buoy near the middle of the inlet. It was a safe little loop I used sometimes when I wanted to check the engine or sit with a fishing rod without drifting into the reeds. The system was not a trap. It was not dangerous. It was not built to hurt anybody, but it had one very useful quality. If someone started Sparrow without knowing what they were doing, the boat would leave the dock, follow its slow circular route, and keep going until the fuel switch cut it off and the return line brought her back. There was a manual stop lever under the console, bright red, clearly labeled, but a person would need to look for it. Earl Bickford had never been much for looking before acting. I spent 3 days testing Sparrow after that. I checked the throttle, the tether, the fuel shutoff, the life jackets, the return line, the emergency stop lever, every screw, every bolt, every connection. I tested it early in the morning when the lake was empty. I let her make the loop once, twice, 5 times. Each time she moved at a walking pace, carving a slow circle in the water, harmless as a carousel. I did not enjoy what I was planning. That is the truth. I did not sit there rubbing my hands together like some cartoon villain. I kept asking myself whether I was becoming the kind of person I had always disliked, somebody who let anger make decisions. But every time I doubted myself, I looked at the cut chain, flyers, the videotapes, and the county map. Earl was not being misunderstood. He was counting on me to get tired. He was counting on me to give in. One Friday morning in late August, I left the road gate unlatched, not open, not swinging wide, just unlatched enough that a person could tell himself it had probably been left that way by mistake. I parked my pickup behind the old bait shop across the road where I had a clear view through the trees to the north side of the cove. I brought a pair of binoculars, the little black and white monitor connected to the Radio Shack camera, my thermos, a stack of blank VHS tapes, and a paperback novel I never opened. At 9:17, Earl's tan Buick station wagon rolled slowly down the road. He did not park in front of my place. He drove past it, turned around near the old mill road, then came back from the other direction and stopped beside the ditch. He sat there for almost 4 minutes. Then he got out. He was wearing jeans, an old plant shirt, and a dark ball cap. No clipboard, no windbreaker, no president's smile. He looked around once, crossed the road, and slipped through the gate. I remember feeling strangely calm. There are moments when the thing you have been waiting for finally happens, and instead of panic, all you feel is stillness. I watched him walk down the drive, past the cabin, toward the dock. He paused near the boat shed, looked over his shoulder, then stepped onto Sparrow. He untied the line. He bent over the motor. I could almost hear him thinking he had beaten me. Then the old Johnson coughed once, twice, and came to life. Sparrow eased away from the dock. Earl stood at the wheel, shoulders back, chin lifted, looking for all the world like he had just reclaimed a piece of history. He made it maybe 30 yards before the steering settled into its turn. At first he did not understand. He pulled the wheel right. Sparrow kept going left. He pulled it harder. The boat continued its slow curve. He reached for the throttle. It would not go past idle. He bent down, pushed something, turned something, slapped the dashboard once, then twice. Sparrow continued moving in a gentle, widening arc around the mooring buoy. I raised my binoculars and watched Earl Bickford, president of the Whispering Pines Lakeshore Association, realize he was riding in a circle. The first loop was quiet. He kept working the wheel, trying to look calm. The second loop was not quiet. He stood up and shouted something I could not hear across the water, but I could make out the shape of the words. By the third loop, he had his hat off, waving it in the air. By the fourth, he was trying to start the main motor again, which only made Sparrow cough and continue her slow turn. I picked up the bait shop's payphone and called the sheriff's office. The dispatcher answered, and I said, "This is Marlene Voss at Pineglass Lake. I need Deputy Ellis sent to my dock. Earl Bickford has entered my property, taken my boat, and he appears to be having a difficult morning." There was a pause. "Is anyone hurt?" she asked. I looked through the binoculars. Earl was standing in the middle of Sparrow, arms stretched wide, yelling at a machine. "Not yet," I said, "but his pride is in serious condition." By the time May arrived, Earl had completed 11 slow circles in the cove. A few neighbors had come down to the road, pretending they were just out for a walk. June Alvarez was there. So was Linda Pollard, who had apparently heard the noise and come running with both hands pressed to her mouth. Kendre stood near her father's car, pale and furious. Sparrow was still looping quietly when Ray stepped onto the dock. He watched Earl for a few seconds, then looked at me. "You know," he said, "I've been a deputy 12 years, and I've never had to respond to a boating incident that looked so much like a county fair ride." I folded my arms. "It is running 6 miles an hour. There are life jackets in the compartment. There is an emergency stop lever under the console." Ray looked out at Earl. "Does he know that?" "He is a smart man," I said. "He will figure it out eventually." Earl saw us on the dock and started yelling louder. "Marlene, shut this thing off," he shouted. "You are going to pay for this." I cupped my hands around my mouth. "You are the one who started it, Earl." He turned red enough that I could see her from shore. I was checking the boat. From inside my locked gate, Ray called out, "Mr. Bickford, stay seated. The boat is coming in." Earl pointed at me. "She set a trap." Ray did not raise his voice. "Sir, were you invited onto her property?" Earl said nothing. "Did she give you permission to operate that vessel?" Earl looked at the water. "I thought it was community access." Ray looked down at the sign nailed beside the dock, then back at Earl. "That sign says private property. It does not say community guessing game." Sparrow made another loop, then the timed fuel cutoff engaged. The old motor sputtered, slowed, and the return line began guiding her back toward the dock. Earl sat down hard on the bench seat, wet with sweat, clutching the edge of the boat like he had crossed the Atlantic instead of circling one small Michigan cove. When Sparrow touched the rubber bumper, Ray stepped forward and helped him out. Earl nearly stumbled. Kendra watched him with tears in her eyes, but not the kind of tears a daughter sheds when she is scared for her father. These were the tears of somebody who had finally seen him clearly and did not like what she saw. Earl looked at me. His face was twisted with fury, humiliation, and something else underneath it, something closer to fear. "You humiliated me," he said. I looked at him for a long moment. "No, Earl," I said. "You humiliated yourself. I just kept the cameras running." Ray took his statement. He took mine. He took the VHS tape from the recorder. He looked at the cut-chain photos. The property records, the flyer showing my dock advertised as community access, and the answering machine tape with Earl saying he hoped things did not become unpleasant. Earl was not arrested that morning. Ray said the county prosecutor would review the evidence first. But Earl left Pine Glass Lake in the back seat of his own Buick while Kendre drove, and when he passed me at the gate, he did not look out the window. For 3 days after that, the phone did not stop ringing. Some callers hung up when I answered. Some left messages calling me names. One man said I was an unstable widow who had tried to drown Earl. I saved that tape too. Flyers appeared on mailboxes around Whispering Pines. They said things like, "Protect our community from dangerous retaliation, and no one should fear their neighbors." Earl's picture was not on them, of course. Mine was. It had been taken from a distance while I stood on the dock, in an old sweatshirt holding a wrench. Under it, somebody had printed, "Is this the face of lake safety?" I would be lying if I said it did not hurt. I had spent my whole adult life trying to be useful. I had hauled strangers out of storms. I had held scared people steady while rescue crews came in. I had spent nights awake beside Tom when his cancer got bad, and I had learned how to smile at people while something inside me was breaking. Now a handful of neighbors who barely knew me were whispering that I was dangerous because I would not let a bully take my home. There were evenings I sat at the kitchen table with the lights off, listening to the answering machine click and whir, wondering whether I should have just sold the cabin and walked away. It would have been easier. That was the worst part. Not anger, not fear, the temptation to disappear. Then, one evening, June came over again. This time, she did not bring pie. She brought a cassette recorder. We sat on the porch while the sky turned orange over the lake. She placed the recorder on the table between us and said, "I should have given you this sooner." She pressed play. At first there was static. Then I heard voices, several people talking in a meeting room. Somebody coughed, papers shuffled. Then Earl's voice came through clear as a bell. "I do not care what Cal Voss wrote on some old deed," he said. "That dock is the difference between selling those Cedar Ridge homes as lakefront and selling them as houses near a lake. We have to keep the North Cove looking available until the closings are done." Someone asked, "What if the niece says no?" I laughed. "Then we make it expensive for her to keep saying no." I sat there without moving. June looked ashamed. "It was a board meeting in April," she said. I recorded it because I knew something was wrong. I did not have the nerve to say anything. I am sorry. I looked at the lake. The water had gone dark blue, almost black at the center. You are saying something now, I told her. The next week changed everything. My lawyer was Sonia Velez, a sharp woman from Graydon who had spent 10 years helping farmers, widows, and small business owners fight people with more money than manners. She wore sensible shoes, kept her dark hair pulled back, and had a way of reading documents that made you feel sorry for the documents. I showed her the maps, the photographs, the videotapes, the brochure, the answering machine tapes, the cut chain, the VHS footage of Earl taking Sparrow, and June's cassette. Sonia listened to the recording twice. Then she leaned back in her chair and said, "Marlene, this man did not just trespass. He tried to manufacture a public right over your land so his family could make money. That is not a neighbor dispute. That is fraud with a lake view." Earl filed a civil complaint 2 weeks later. He claimed I had intentionally endangered him, caused emotional distress, and created an unsafe boating system designed to trap innocent people. The papers came in a manila envelope delivered by a young man who looked apologetic before he even got out of his car. I read every page, then I walked down to the dock, sat on the end of it, and laughed so hard I scared a heron out of the reeds. The hearing took place in October at the Pine County Courthouse, a red brick building with flickering fluorescent lights and a vending machine that had been selling the same stale crackers since 1987. Earl arrived in a grey suit with a striped tie and a lawyer named Harold Klein, who had shiny shoes, a red silk pocket square, and the smug expression of a man who had never had to carry his own groceries. Kendra was there too, sitting behind her father with her arms crossed. June sat beside me. Sonia sat at my table with 3 cardboard boxes full of evidence, a stack of parcel maps, a VCR, and a television monitor the court clerk had rolled in on a cart. Earl kept looking at me as if he expected me to flinch. I did not. I had already spent too many years flinching from things that deserved a full stare. Harold Klein opened by calling me reckless. He said I had built a dangerous device, lured Earl onto my property, and placed him at risk of drowning. He said Earl had only entered the property because he believed it was common shoreline. He said the association had long-standing rights. Sonia let him talk. She did not interrupt. She took notes. Then the judge, a quiet woman named Judge Ruth Mallory, turned to Sonia and said, "Your response." Sonia stood up, walked to the television cart, and slid the VHS tape into the machine. The screen flickered, the courtroom filled with grey static. Then there was Earl, in his plaid shirt and bowl cap, crossing my gate, walking past the private property sign, stepping onto Sparrow and starting the engine. Nobody spoke. Sonia paused the tape just as Earl's face turned toward the camera. Then she turned to him. "Mr. Bickford, is that you?" Earl looked at his lawyer. Harold whispered something. Earl said, "I was investigating a safety concern." Sonia nodded. "From inside a locked private gate." The gate was unlatched. Was the sign unlatched? Earl did not answer. Sonia changed the tape. The next video showed Sparrow making slow circles in the cove. Earl was standing at the wheel, shouting and pulling at the controls. The court clerk covered his mouth to hide a smile. Judge Mallory did not smile, but her eyebrows moved slightly. Sonia paused the tape again. "Mr. Bickford, did you see the emergency stop lever under the console?" Earl said, "I was frightened." "Did you look for a safety mechanism?" "I was in distress." "Did you call for help?" I shouted. Sonia nodded. "You shouted at a boat you had taken without permission." Harold stood up. "Objection. Counsel is being argumentative." Judge Mallory looked at him. "Overruled. It appears the boat is not the only thing going in circles today." There was a sound in the room that was not quite laughter but close enough. Then Sonia brought out the property map. She enlarged it on a board. She showed the shoreline, my parcel line, the dock, the birch path, and the boundaries of Whispering Pines. She showed there was no easement, no shared access, no legal authority. She showed the brochure from Bickford Homes that advertised my dock as part of the community. Finally, she put June's cassette into the recorder. Earl's voice filled the courtroom again. "That dock is the difference between selling those Cedar Ridge homes as lakefront and selling them as houses near a lake. We have to keep the North Cove looking available until the closings are done. We make it expensive for her to keep saying no." For the first time all morning, Earl stopped looking angry. He looked small. Not physically small. Earl was a big man, but he looked like somebody had opened a door in a room he had spent years keeping dark. Kendra stood up behind him. I heard her say very softly, "Dad, how could you?" He did not turn around. Judge Mallory took off her glasses and folded them in her hands. "Mr. Bickford," she said, "you entered private property without permission, operated a private vessel without permission, represented property you did not own as community access, and then filed a complaint against the owner after the evidence showed you were trespassing. Do you have anything else you would like this court to consider?" Earl looked at Harold. Harold looked at the floor. Earl looked at the floor. Earl swallowed. "I was trying to protect the community," he said. Judge Mallory looked at him for a long time. "No, Mr. Bickford," she said. "You were trying to protect a promise you had no right to make." The complaint was dismissed. Sonia filed counterclaims for trespass, harassment, and defamation. Earl agreed to a settlement before the end of the month. He had to issue a written retraction, stop using my property in any advertising, remove every brochure that showed my dock, and pay for legal costs and the damage to my gate. The Whispering Pines board voted him out as president 3 weeks later. Linda Pollard resigned. Roger Field stopped coming to meetings. And June Alvarez, the quiet woman with the rose umbrella, became the new association president. Her first official notice went into every mailbox around Pine Blast Lake. It said, "Effective immediately. Whispering Pines Lakeshore Association recognizes and respects all private property boundaries." It also said in smaller letters near the bottom, "No resident may enter another person's property, dock, or boat without express permission." That last part made me laugh when I read it. Earl's daughter held her wedding at the Marina Pavilion in November. I did not attend, but June told me it was beautiful. Kendra wore a simple ivory dress. The weather stayed clear, and no one needed to trespass to get married. Earl showed up for the ceremony, but he did not speak. A few months later, the Cedar Ridge development signs disappeared from the road. Bickford Homes never finished the project. People said Earl's brother-in-law lost investors after the county began asking questions about the brochures. People also said Earl and his wife put their house up for sale the following spring. I do not know if that was true. I never drove past to check. By then I was busy repairing the porch, repainting the boat shed, and teaching myself how to enjoy quiet without waiting for somebody to take it away. The funniest thing was, after Earl left, the lake did not collapse. The neighborhood did not fall apart. The children still swam at the public launch. Families still had cookouts at the marina. People still watched fireworks on the 4th of July. The only difference was that they stopped treating somebody else's property like an extension of their own backyard. June came by one afternoon in the spring of 1996 with a new association newsletter. She handed it to me through the gate, and I noticed she did not touch the latch until I told her to come in. "You have changed the culture around here," she said. I looked at the lake. "I did not change it," I said. "I just made people read the signs." She smiled. "Sometimes that is the same thing. I still have Sparrow. She sits in the boat shed every winter under a canvas cover, and every summer I take her out at sunrise before the lake gets busy. The steering works fine. The engine still coughs twice before it catches. The old cream stripe has faded almost completely now. Every so often somebody asks me whether I regret what happened to Earl. They ask if I think I went too far. If setting that loop was cruel, if I should have called the sheriff sooner, handled it another way. I always tell them the same thing. I did call the sheriff. I kept records. I posted signs. I gave warnings. I said no more times than I can count. Earl did not get on that boat because I forced him. He got on because he believed a woman alone would eventually surrender, just to make the trouble stop. And maybe that is the part that stayed with me more than anything else. Some people do not see silence as peace. They see it as permission. They think kindness means weakness, that patience means surrender, that a quiet person has no line they will defend. I learned something on Pine Glass Lake in 1995. Peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is knowing where your boundaries are, keeping them clear, and refusing to apologize for protecting them. These days, I sit on the dock with my coffee and watch the sun come up over the water. I hear birds in the pines, the hum of a fishing boat somewhere across the lake, and sometimes the old brass bell on my gate when a neighbor comes by to ask if they can borrow a wrench. I like that sound now. It means somebody is asking instead of taking, but I still keep the locks. I still keep the notebook in the kitchen drawer. And every once in a while, when Sparrow coughs to life and starts moving across the smooth morning water, I remember Earl Bickford standing in the middle of that boat, shouting at the lake like the lake owed him an apology. So tell me what you think. Did Marlene go too far by letting Earl learn his lesson on the water, or did Earl finally get exactly the kind of answer he had spent months earning? Have you ever dealt with someone who confused community with control, or kindness with permission? Leave your story in the comments, because sometimes the hardest thing in the world is not fighting back. Sometimes it is simply refusing to hand over the part of your life that should have been yours all along.